A scream in the silence of a mansion, a cleaning lady with nothing to lose, and a 6-year-old boy whose entire existence is built on a lie so monstrous it will shatter everything you think you know about love, loss, and the desperate lengths people will go to for what they want. When Ellen Rodriguez breaks down a locked door to save a child from the hands of a killer, she has no idea she's about to uncover a truth that's been buried for 7 years. A truth about a missing baby. A truth about a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. A truth that will force a millionaire to his knees and reveal that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones capable of the darkest betrayals. What started as an act of heroism becomes a mother's fight against impossible odds, against unlimited wealth, against a system designed to protect the powerful and silence the broken. This is not just a story about saving a child. This is a story about what happens when the child you save turns out to be the one stolen from you. And when the truth finally comes to light, no one will walk away unchanged. If you want to see stories that will move you, that will make you question everything, and that prove truth is always worth fighting for, subscribe to this channel, leave a like, and comment where you're watching from. Your support means everything. The late afternoon sun cut through the tall windows of the Miller mansion like golden blades, casting long shadows across the imported Italian marble floors. Ellen Rodriguez wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her worn hand, her knees aching from 3 hours of scrubbing on all fours. At 42 years old, her body reminded her daily of every sacrifice she'd made since Miguel died, leaving her alone to raise Emily and pay off medical bills that seemed to multiply like weeds. The mansion sat on 12 acres just outside Austin, Texas, where the old oil money neighborhoods gave way to newer tech fortunes. Ellen had been cleaning this particular palace of privilege for nearly 8 months now, ever since the agency placed her here after Mrs. Miller's tragic death in that car accident. The house always felt too quiet, too cold despite the Texas heat outside. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your eardrums, that made you aware of your own breathing, your own heartbeat. She dipped her cloth into the bucket of pine-scented water, watching the liquid swirl and settle. The grandfather clock in the foyer, an antique that probably cost more than her annual salary, ticked with mechanical precision. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Each second a reminder of time passing, of life slipping through fingers that scrubbed other people's dirt for minimum wage. Ellen squeezed the cloth and continued down the west corridor, past oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who weren't even the Miller family's real relatives. Jonathan Miller had bought them at an estate sale, she'd heard the housekeeper say once. Even the family history here was purchased, manufactured, curated for appearance. The silence stretched. Too much silence for a house with a 6-year-old boy. Then it happened. A scream ripped through the air, high-pitched, desperate, the kind of sound that turns your blood to ice water. It was a child's scream, but not the scream of a scraped knee or a broken toy. This was pure terror. This was a scream that said, "Help me. Someone is hurting me. I'm going to die." Ellen's bucket crashed to the floor, dirty water spreading across the marble like a dark stain. Her body moved before her mind caught up, maternal instinct overriding every thought. She ran toward the sound, her worn sneakers slapping against the stone, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. The scream came from upstairs. Daniel's room. She took the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, her lungs burning, her legs protesting. The house suddenly felt enormous, endless, a labyrinth designed to keep her from reaching that child in time. Down the upstairs hallway, past more paintings, past the door to the master suite where Jonathan Miller sometimes worked late into the night on conference calls to Dubai and Singapore. Daniel's door was closed. The screaming had stopped, replaced by something worse, choking sounds, desperate gasping, the awful wet sounds of someone fighting for air. Ellen didn't knock, didn't hesitate. She grabbed the doorknob and twisted, but it was locked. The gasping grew weaker. "Daniel!" she screamed, slamming her shoulder against the solid oak door. Pain exploded through her arm, but the door didn't budge. She stepped back, and with strength she didn't know she possessed, the strength of every mother who has ever fought to protect a child, She launched herself at the door again. The lock splintered. Wood cracked. The door flew open. The scene inside would haunt Ellen for the rest of her life. Little Daniel Miller, with his sandy blonde hair and those huge blue eyes that always reminded her of her own son lost years ago, was on his knees on the plush carpet. His face had turned a terrible shade of purple-red, his mouth open in a soundless scream. His small hands clawed desperately at his own throat. Behind him stood Catherine Walsh, the nanny Jonathan had hired just 3 months ago. 32 years old, impeccable references, a smile that charmed everyone she met. Right now, that smile was gone. Her face was twisted into something Ellen had never seen on a human being before. Pure, concentrated hatred. Her hands were wrapped around Daniel's throat from behind, her manicured nails digging into the soft flesh of his neck, squeezing, crushing. Time seemed to slow down. Ellen saw everything with horrible clarity. The way Daniel's legs were giving out beneath him, the tears streaming down his face, the little dinosaur pajamas he was wearing even though it was late afternoon. She saw the broken lamp on the floor, the overturned chair, the signs of a struggle. She saw Catherine's eyes, and in them she saw something that made her blood run cold. This wasn't rage. This wasn't a moment of lost control. This was deliberate. This was murder. "Get away from him!" Ellen's voice came out as a roar, something primal and fierce. Catherine's head snapped toward her, and for a fraction of a second, something like surprise flickered across her face. But she didn't let go. If anything, her grip tightened. Ellen didn't think. She launched herself across the room like a linebacker, all 140 pounds of cleaning lady muscle and maternal fury. She crashed into Catherine with enough force to knock them both sideways. Catherine's hands finally released Daniel's throat as she tried to catch herself from falling. Daniel collapsed forward, gasping, coughing, pulling air into his starved lungs with horrible wheezing sounds. But Catherine was strong, stronger than Ellen expected. She spun, her eyes wild, and shoved Ellen hard against the wall. Ellen's head cracked against the plaster and stars exploded in her vision. She tasted blood. "You don't understand," Catherine hissed, her voice barely human. "You don't know what he is, what he represents." Ellen grabbed the first thing her hand touched, a heavy hardcover book from Daniel's shelf, and swung it at Catherine's head. It connected with a sickening thud. Catherine staggered back, and Ellen used the moment to grab Daniel, pulling him against her chest, shielding him with her body. The little boy was shaking violently, his small arms wrapping around Ellen's neck with desperate strength. His face buried into her shoulder, and she could feel hot tears soaking through her work shirt. He was trying to say something, but only sobs came out. "Shh, baby, shh," Ellen whispered, holding him tight, her own tears flowing freely now. "I've got you. You're safe. I've got you." Catherine had fallen to her knees, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow where the book had struck. But even now, even defeated, she was smiling. A terrible, knowing smile that made Ellen's skin crawl. "You saved him," Catherine said, her voice sing-song, almost playful. "How touching. The poor little cleaning lady playing hero. But tell me, Ellen." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on Ellen's with unnerving intensity. "Do you have any idea who you really saved?" Footsteps pounded up the stairs. The security guard, Marcus, a former Marine who took his job seriously, burst into the room, his hand on his weapon. "Ma'am, step away from the child," he ordered Catherine. But Catherine ignored him. She kept staring at Ellen, kept smiling that awful smile. "He's not who you think he is," she said. "Daniel Miller, that boy in your arms." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "He's not Jonathan Miller's son. He never was. And when the truth comes out, and it will, Ellen, it always does, you'll understand why I had to do this. You'll understand everything." Marcus moved forward and grabbed Catherine's arms, pulling them behind her back as he called for backup on his radio. She didn't resist. She just kept laughing, kept staring at Ellen with those manic eyes. "Ask about the hospital, Ellen," Catherine called out as Marcus dragged her toward the door. "Ask about 7 years ago. Ask about the baby that disappeared. Ask. The door slammed shut, cutting off her words, but the damage was done. Those words hung in the air like poison gas, seeping into Ellen's consciousness, planting seeds of doubt and horror that would only grow. Daniel was still shaking in her arms, his breathing ragged but steady. Alive. Safe. For now. But Ellen couldn't stop hearing Catherine's words. He's not Jonathan Miller's son. And the way she'd said that other part. The baby that disappeared. 7 years ago. 7 years ago, Ellen had given birth at Austin Memorial Hospital. 7 years ago, she'd held her son for exactly 4 hours before falling asleep from exhaustion. 7 years ago, she'd woken up to nurses and security guards, and a doctor with tears in his eyes telling her that her baby boy was gone. Disappeared. Vanished from the hospital nursery like smoke. They never found him. The case went cold. The police eventually stopped returning her calls. Ellen looked down at the child in her arms. This beautiful, terrified 6-year-old with his mother's blonde hair and his father's blue eyes. His father's eyes. Jonathan Miller's eyes. Except Catherine had just said he wasn't Jonathan's son at all. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too thick. Ellen's head spun with questions she was terrified to ask, connections she was terrified to make. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Help was coming. But Ellen had the horrible feeling that what was really coming was something much worse than help. The truth was coming. And she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. The police cruiser's red and blue lights painted the Miller mansion in alternating shades of emergency, turning the pristine white columns into a grotesque carnival display. Ellen sat on the bottom step of the grand staircase, Daniel still clinging to her like a baby koala. His small fingers twisted into the fabric of her shirt so tightly, she knew there would be wrinkles that wouldn't come out. She didn't care. Let there be wrinkles. Let there be stains. This child was breathing, and that was all that mattered. Or was it? Catherine's words kept replaying in her mind like a broken record stuck on the worst possible song. He's not Jonathan Miller's son. What did that even mean? And why had she looked at Ellen with such knowing satisfaction when she said it? A female officer with kind eyes and graying hair at her temples approached them slowly, the way you'd approach a wounded animal. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Patricia Gonzalez. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here." Ellen nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Daniel whimpered and burrowed deeper against her chest. "It's okay, sweetheart," Ellen whispered into his hair, which smelled like baby shampoo and innocence. "The nice police officer just wants to help." But even as she said it, she wondered if anyone could really help. Not when the world had just tilted sideways, and nothing made sense anymore. The front door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, and Jonathan Miller stormed in like a tornado, made of expensive cologne and barely contained rage. He was still wearing his tailored suit from whatever business meeting he'd abandoned when Marcus called him, his tie slightly loosened, his normally perfect hair disheveled. At 47, he was what magazines called distinguished, silver at the temples, sharp jawline, the kind of confident posture that came from never having to worry about money or consequences. "Where is he?" Jonathan's voice boomed through the foyer, echoing off the high ceilings. "Where's my son?" His eyes found Daniel, and something in his face cracked. Just for a moment, Ellen saw real fear there, real love. But then his gaze shifted to Ellen, and that crack sealed up faster than it had appeared, replaced by something cold and suspicious. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, striding toward them. "Marcus said Catherine attacked Daniel, but that's impossible. Catherine passed every background check. She had references from senators, for God's sake." Officer Gonzalez stepped between them, her hand raised in a calming gesture. "Mr. Miller, I understand you're upset, but I need you to let me do my job. Your son is safe. The perpetrator is in custody. Right now, I need to get statements from everyone involved." "Statements?" Jonathan's laugh was bitter, sharp as broken glass. "My son was nearly murdered in his own home by someone I trusted, someone I paid very well to keep him safe. And you want statements?" Daniel flinched at the volume of his father's voice, and Ellen instinctively tightened her arms around him. The movement didn't go unnoticed. Jonathan's eyes narrowed, focusing on the way his son clung to the cleaning lady instead of reaching for him. "Daniel," Jonathan said, his voice forced into something softer but not quite gentle. "Come here, son. Come to Daddy." Daniel's grip on Ellen tightened. He shook his head against her shoulder, a small, terrified movement. The rejection hit Jonathan like a physical blow. Ellen could see it in the way his jaw clenched, the way his hands formed fists at his sides. But instead of hurt, what bubbled up was anger. "What did you do?" Jonathan's voice dropped to something dangerous, something that made the police officers in the room shift uncomfortably. "What did you say to him? Did you tell him something? Did you put ideas in his head?" "Mr. Miller," Officer Gonzalez started, but Ellen cut her off. "I saved his life." Ellen's voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. "I heard him screaming. I broke down the door. Your nanny had her hands around his throat, and if I hadn't gotten there when I did, Daniel would be dead right now." The words hung in the air like an accusation. Because wasn't that what it was? Jonathan had hired Catherine. Jonathan had let her into their lives. Jonathan had been too busy with his business empire to notice that something was wrong. But instead of gratitude, instead of acknowledgement, Jonathan's face twisted into something ugly. "Or maybe," he said slowly, deliberately, "you saw an opportunity, a rich family, a vulnerable child. Maybe you and Catherine cooked this up together. You play the hero, gain my trust, position yourself to sue me for emotional damages or demand a reward. I've seen it before, people like you. People like me?" Ellen stood up, fury burning through her exhaustion. Daniel's arms stayed locked around her neck, and she supported his weight easily, fueled by indignation. "You mean people who actually care about your son? People who don't see him as a status symbol or a tax deduction?" "How dare you?" Jonathan started, but Officer Gonzalez stepped fully between them now, her hand on her belt near her radio. "Enough, both of you." Her voice had steel in it now, the voice of someone who'd broken up too many domestic disputes to have patience for wealthy people's drama. "Mr. Miller, attacking the woman who saved your son's life is not going to help anyone. And Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you're shaken, but let's all take a breath." A commotion at the door drew everyone's attention. 2 more officers were escorting Catherine Walsh out in handcuffs, and despite the blood on her face and her disheveled appearance, she was smiling. Not a crazy smile. Something worse. A satisfied smile. A smile that said she knew something no one else did. As they passed through the foyer, Catherine's eyes found Ellen, found Daniel, and her smile grew wider. "Did you tell him yet?" Catherine called out, her voice sing-song, almost playful. "Did you tell Mr. Miller the truth about his precious son?" Jonathan froze. "What is she talking about?" Catherine laughed, the sound echoing off the marble like shattering crystal. "Oh, this is perfect. This is absolutely perfect. Jonathan Miller, oil tycoon, philanthropist, pillar of the community, and he doesn't even know his whole life is built on a lie." "Shut her up," Jonathan ordered the officers, but Catherine kept talking, kept laughing, even as they dragged her toward the door. 7 years ago, she shouted, "Austin Memorial Hospital, ask about the missing baby, ask about—" The door slammed shut, cutting off her words. But the damage was done. Those words, 7 years ago, Austin Memorial Hospital, missing baby, they detonated in Ellen's chest like a bomb, sending shrapnel through every organ, every nerve. No, it couldn't be. Jonathan turned to Officer Gonzalez, his face pale. "What is she talking about? What missing baby?" But Ellen couldn't hear the answer. Her ears were ringing. Her vision was tunneling. Because 7 years ago at Austin Memorial Hospital, her baby had been stolen from the nursery. Her 3-day-old son, with his shock of blonde hair and blue eyes, had vanished while she slept. The hospital had been in chaos. Police investigated for months. Security footage showed nothing. It was as if he'd simply ceased to exist. They'd told her he was probably taken by someone desperate for a child, sold on the black market. possibly even dead. Eventually, they'd stopped looking. Eventually, everyone had moved on. Everyone except Ellen. She looked down at the child in her arms. Really looked at him, at his blonde hair, his blue eyes, the small birthmark on his left wrist that she'd noticed before but never thought anything of. Her son had a birthmark on his left wrist, shaped like a crescent moon. With trembling fingers, Ellen gently moved Daniel's sleeve up. There, on his small wrist, was a birthmark, shaped like a crescent moon. The world tilted. The floor seemed to drop out from under her feet. She must have made a sound, a gasp, a sob, something, because everyone turned to look at her. "Ms. Rodriguez?" Officer Gonzalez's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" But Ellen couldn't answer, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at that birthmark and feel her entire world rearrange itself into a new, impossible, terrifying shape. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and stop signs that Ellen barely registered. Her hands gripped the steering wheel of her 15-year-old Honda Civic so tightly her knuckles had turned white, bloodless. The check engine light had been on for 3 months. She couldn't afford to fix it, and the car made a rattling sound every time she accelerated past 45. Tonight she didn't hear it. Didn't hear anything except Catherine Walsh's voice echoing in her skull like a ghost that wouldn't be exorcised. "Ask about the missing baby." The officer had let her go after an hour of questioning, after she'd given her statement 3 times, after they'd photographed the bruise forming on her shoulder where she'd rammed the door, after Jonathan Miller had signed papers she didn't read and waved her away like an inconvenient problem he'd deal with later. Daniel had finally been pried from her arms by a child psychologist the police brought in, and Ellen had watched him disappear into another room, his eyes locked on hers until the door closed between them. Those eyes. Those impossibly blue eyes that looked so much like Miguel's, like her mother's, like the baby she'd held for 4 hours before her world ended. Ellen's phone buzzed in the cup holder. Emily. Her daughter had been texting her frantically since the news broke. Apparently, someone at school had seen the police cars at the Miller mansion and posted about it on social media, and now half of Austin thought there'd been a murder. Ellen had texted back a quick "I'm fine, home soon," but that hadn't stopped the flood of worried messages. She pulled into the driveway of their small rental house in the working-class neighborhood east of I-35, where the lawns were patchy and most houses had cars parked on blocks in the driveways. Their place was a modest 2-bedroom with peeling paint and a roof that leaked when it rained hard. But it was theirs, or at least they'd been paying rent on it for 6 years, which felt close enough to ownership when you'd never had anything else. The porch light was on, and Ellen could see Emily's silhouette through the living room window, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. The moment Ellen's car door opened, the front door flew open too. "Mom!" Emily burst out onto the porch, all 16 years of teenage anxiety and dramatics on full display. She was wearing Miguel's old University of Texas hoodie, the one Ellen couldn't bring herself to donate, and her long dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Oh my God, Mom, are you okay? What happened? Everyone's saying someone tried to kill the Miller kid and you saved him, and there's a video going around, but it's really blurry and—" "Mija, please." Ellen held up a hand as she climbed the 3 concrete steps to the porch, every muscle in her body screaming with exhaustion. "Not right now, I need a minute." But Emily followed her inside, trailed her to the kitchen where Ellen filled a glass with tap water and drank it in one long gulp, then filled it again. The house smelled like the microwaved pizza rolls Emily had clearly eaten for dinner, again, instead of the leftover chicken Ellen had left instructions about. The dishes were piled in the sink. Emily's backpack and textbooks were scattered across the dining table they'd bought at a yard sale. Normal. Everything was so beautifully, devastatingly normal. "Mom, you're scaring me." Emily's voice had dropped to something softer now, more vulnerable. She'd inherited her father's emotional intelligence, could always tell when Ellen was one breath away from falling apart. "What happened? And don't say nothing because I can see it on your face." Ellen set the glass down, her hands shaking so badly water sloshed over the rim. She gripped the edge of the counter, her head bowed, and tried to find words for the impossible thoughts swirling through her mind. The nanny, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. At the Miller house, she was trying to kill the boy, Daniel. I stopped her. Holy shit. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Are you serious? Is he okay? Are you okay? He's alive. I'm fine. But she said something. Ellen's voice cracked and she had to stop, had to breathe through the tightness in her chest. She said something that doesn't make sense. Emily moved closer, tentative, the way she used to approach Ellen in the months after Miguel died when grief had turned her mother into someone fragile and unpredictable. What did she say? Ellen turned to face her daughter, and in Emily's face she saw Miguel, his strong nose, his warm brown eyes, his ability to listen without judgment. But she also saw herself, her own stubbornness, her own capacity for survival. This girl had lost her father at 9 years old and watched her mother work 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed. This girl was stronger than Ellen gave her credit for. She said the boy isn't Jonathan Miller's son. The words came out flat, factual, as if saying them that way would make them hurt less. She said something about 7 years ago, about a missing baby, about— Ellen's breath hitched, about Austin Memorial Hospital. The blood drained from Emily's face. She knew. Of course she knew. They never talked about it. Ellen's lost baby, the brother Emily would never meet. But it lived between them like a third resident of the house. A ghost. They stepped around carefully. Mom. Emily's voice was small now, frightened. What are you saying? I don't know what I'm saying. Ellen pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stop the tears that were threatening to fall. I don't know anything, but that boy, Daniel, he has a birthmark on his left wrist, shaped like a crescent moon. The silence that followed was so complete, Ellen could hear the refrigerator humming, could hear Mrs. Chen next door yelling at her husband about forgetting to buy milk, could hear her own heart beating too fast, too hard. Like Benjamin, Emily whispered. Benjamin. They'd named him Benjamin Miguel Rodriguez, after Ellen's father and her husband. She'd held him for 4 hours, had counted his tiny fingers and toes, had traced that crescent moon birthmark with her thumb while she whispered promises about the life they'd have together. Then she'd fallen asleep, exhausted from 18 hours of labor and an emergency C-section. When she woke up, her arms were empty. It's probably a coincidence, Ellen said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Lots of people have birthmarks. It doesn't mean— Mom, stop. Emily's voice was sharp now, cutting through Ellen's denial like a knife. You need to tell someone, the police, that detective who worked on Benjamin's case, someone. And say what? That I think my dead baby is actually alive and living as a millionaire's son because a crazy nanny told me to ask about 7 years ago, and he has the same birthmark. Ellen laughed, a broken sound that turned into a sob halfway through. They'll think I'm insane. They'll think I'm trying to scam the Millers out of money. Jonathan already accused me of that tonight. He what? Emily's face flushed with anger. That entitled piece of language, Ellen said automatically, even now, even in the middle of everything falling apart. Emily ignored her. If there's even a chance that boy is Benjamin, don't you want to know? Don't you deserve to know? Of course I want to know. The words exploded out of Ellen, loud enough that she had to lower her voice, had to remember the thin walls and nosy neighbors. I've wanted to know every single day for 7 years. Every little boy I see with blonde hair, I wonder. Every time someone posts about finding their biological parents or reuniting with lost children, I torture myself imagining it's him. But wanting something and having the right to it are 2 different things. You have every right, Emily started, but Ellen cut her off. Do I? That boy thinks Jonathan Miller is his father. He's lived in that mansion his whole life. He goes to private school. He has everything. And I'm what? A cleaning lady who can barely afford to keep this roof over our heads? Even if, and that's a huge if, even if by some miracle he really is Benjamin, what gives me the right to blow up his entire world? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Emily's eyes filled with tears and she looked so young suddenly, so much like the 9-year-old who'd clung to Ellen at Miguel's funeral. "Because he's your son," Emily said quietly. "Because someone stole him from you. Because the truth matters even when it's hard." Ellen reached out and pulled Emily into a hug, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of her daughter's coconut shampoo and teenage defiance. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." Emily's voice was muffled against Ellen's shoulder. "A woman who breaks down doors to save children she barely knows. Who works herself to exhaustion to give me everything I need. Who never, ever gives up, even when life keeps kicking her down." They stood there in the kitchen holding each other, while outside the night deepened and somewhere across town, a little boy with a crescent moon birthmark tried to sleep despite nightmares about hands around his throat. Ellen didn't know what she was going to do, didn't know how to move forward when every step felt like walking off a cliff. But Emily was right about one thing. The truth mattered. And Ellen had spent 7 years not knowing the truth about what happened to her son. Maybe it was time to find out. Ellen didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a map of some country she'd never visit, and watched the hours tick by on her alarm clock. 2:47 a.m., 3:23 a.m., 4:51 a.m. Each minute felt like an eternity, each hour a lifetime of questions that had no answers. When the first pale light of dawn finally crept through her thin curtains, Ellen gave up on sleep entirely. She showered in water that never got quite hot enough, dressed in her most respectable outfit, a pair of black slacks Emily had bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, and a simple blue blouse, and drank coffee so strong it tasted like liquid anxiety. Emily emerged from her bedroom at 6:30, already dressed for school, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. "You're really going to do this?" Ellen nodded, not trusting her voice. "Want me to skip school? Come with you?" "Absolutely not." Ellen managed a smile that felt like it might crack her face. "Your trigonometry test is today. You've been studying for weeks. Math doesn't matter if it matters." Ellen cupped Emily's face in her hands, looked into those eyes that were so much like Miguel's it hurt. "Whatever happens today, your education matters. Your future matters. Promise me you'll go to school." Emily hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Okay, but you text me every hour." "Every single hour, or I'm leaving class and coming to find you." "Deal." They hugged for a long moment, holding on to each other like drowning people holding on to life preservers. Then Emily grabbed her backpack and left, and Ellen was alone with her fear and her desperate, dangerous hope. Austin Memorial Hospital looked exactly the same as it had 7 years ago. The same beige exterior, the same automatic doors that whooshed open with a mechanical sigh, the same antiseptic smell that hit you the moment you stepped inside. Ellen stood in the parking lot for 10 minutes, her hand on her car door, trying to find the courage to go inside. This was where she'd given birth to Benjamin. This was where she'd held him, nursed him, whispered promises to him. This was where she'd lost him. The memories crashed over her like waves, Miguel holding her hand during contractions, his face pale with worry and wonder. The moment they'd placed Benjamin on her chest, still covered in vernix and blood, his tiny lungs taking their first breaths. The way he'd looked at her with those unfocused newborn eyes as if he somehow already knew her, already loved her. And then waking up to find him gone. The panic. The screaming. The nurses rushing in. Security flooding the maternity ward. Police with their questions and their notepads and their carefully neutral expressions that couldn't quite hide their pity. Ellen forced herself to move, to walk across the parking lot and through those automatic doors before her courage abandoned her completely. The information desk was staffed by a young woman with purple hair and multiple piercings, definitely not someone who'd been working here 7 years ago. Ellen approached slowly, her heart hammering. "Hi, can I help you?" The receptionist's smile was professional, friendly. "I'm looking for someone who worked in the maternity ward 7 years ago." Ellen's voice came out steadier than she felt. "A nurse or doctor who might remember." She paused, swallowing hard. Who might remember a case? A missing baby. The receptionist's smile faltered. Oh, that's kind of unusual. Most of our employment records are confidential, and I'm not sure I can... Please. Ellen leaned forward, and she didn't care that she was begging, didn't care about pride or dignity or anything except getting answers. My son was taken from this hospital. Someone stole him from the nursery while I was sleeping. The case went cold. The police stopped investigating. But I need to know what happened. I need to know if anyone remembers anything. Anything at all. The receptionist's expression softened with sympathy. I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine. But I started here 2 years ago. I don't know anything about... Is there anyone who's been here long enough? A supervisor? The head of the maternity ward? The receptionist bit her lip, clearly torn between hospital policy and basic human compassion. Finally, she leaned in conspiratorially. Dr. Patricia Reeves. She's been the head of maternity for like 15 years. She might remember, but I can't just give you her schedule or anything. That's against... When does she usually do rounds? I really can't... Please. Ellen's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back. I'm not trying to sue anyone. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need answers. I just need to know what happened to my baby. The receptionist glanced around, then sighed. She usually grabs coffee from the cafeteria around 8:30, before her morning rounds, but I didn't tell you that. Thank you. Ellen's voice broke on the words. Thank you so much. The hospital cafeteria was a depressing space with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced, and the perpetual smell of overcooked vegetables and institutional coffee. Ellen bought a cup of that coffee, watery and bitter, and found a table near the entrance where she could watch everyone who came and went. She waited, checked her phone, texted Emily that she was fine, waited some more, watched doctors and nurses and visitors flow past in their personal rivers of crisis and routine. At 8:42 a.m., a woman in her late 50s entered the cafeteria. She had gray hair cut in a practical bob, glasses on a chain around her neck, and the kind of purposeful stride that spoke of someone who'd been working in hospitals for decades. She wore scrubs with little teddy bears on them, and a name tag that read, Dr. Patricia Reeves, Head of Maternity. Ellen's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. She stood up, her legs shaky, and intercepted Dr. Reeves at the coffee station. Dr. Reeves, could I speak with you for just a moment? The doctor turned, her expression professionally pleasant but guarded. She'd probably been approached by anxious family members 1,000 times. I'm sorry. If you have questions about a patient, you'll need to go through proper channels. Hype regulations. It's about my son. Ellen's voice cracked. Benjamin Rodriguez. He was stolen from the maternity ward 7 years ago. You were working here then. I remember you. You were one of the doctors who tried to help me when he disappeared. Recognition flickered across Dr. Reeves's face, followed by something that looked like pain. Mrs. Rodriguez, Ellen, I remember. I'm so sorry. That was one of the worst nights of my career. Do you remember anything? Ellen moved closer, urgent now. Anything unusual? Anyone suspicious? The police said there was no footage, that somehow all the security cameras malfunctioned at once. But that doesn't make sense. Someone had to have planned it. Dr. Reeves glanced around the cafeteria, then gestured to Ellen's table. Sit, please. They sat, and Dr. Reeves set down her coffee cup with hands that Ellen noticed were trembling slightly. I've thought about that night so many times. We all have. The entire staff. There was an investigation, reviews, policy changes, but nothing brought your baby back. What do you remember? Ellen pressed. Anything, even if it seems insignificant. Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, her fingers drumming against her coffee cup. There was a woman. She came in that evening, said she was from social services doing a routine check on all the newborns. She had credentials, a badge, everything looked legitimate. But something felt off about her. The way she moved. The way she asked questions. I mentioned it to security, but they said her paperwork checked out. Ellen's pulse quickened. What did she look like? Brunette, tall, late 20s, maybe early 30s. Very put together, professional. She had this smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Dr. Reeves paused. I saw her near the nursery around the time your son went missing, but when we reviewed the incident afterward, there was no record of any social services visits scheduled that day. It was like she was a ghost. Did anyone get her name, a photo, anything? The badge she showed security was fake. We found out later. High-quality fake, but fake nonetheless. By the time we realized, she was long gone. Dr. Reeves reached across the table and squeezed Ellen's hand. I'm so sorry. I've wished 1,000 times I'd trusted my instincts, called security sooner, done something different. Ellen's mind was racing, pieces of a puzzle starting to click into place. 7 years ago. A professional operation. Fake credentials, someone who knew how to avoid cameras. She looked up at Dr. Reeves. What happened to the other babies born that day? Were any of them taken home by families who might have been... She struggled for the right words. Who might have been desperate enough to pay for a black market adoption? Dr. Reeves's eyes widened. You think someone bought your son? I don't know what I think, but I need to know who gave birth here around the same time I did. Who took home babies? Who... Ellen's voice broke. Who might have my son? Ellen, that information is protected. I could lose my license. Please. Ellen was crying now, openly, desperately. Please. I think I might have found him. I think I know where he is. But I need to be sure. I need to know if there's any connection. Dr. Reeves stared at her for a long moment, then closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was steel there. Determination. Give me 24 hours. I'll see what I can find. No promises, but I'll try. 24 hours felt like 24 years. Ellen went through the motions of living, making Emily breakfast, dropping her off at school, going to her afternoon cleaning job at the Henderson house where Mrs. Henderson talked endlessly about her garden club drama, while Ellen scrubbed toilets and tried not to scream. Every minute crawled by with excruciating slowness, every hour a fresh torture of waiting and wondering. Dr. Reeves had promised to call by noon the next day. Ellen checked her phone so often that Emily finally snapped at dinner. Mom, staring at it won't make it ring faster. But when noon came and went with no call, Ellen felt something inside her start to crumble. Maybe Dr. Reeves had changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized the risk was too great. Maybe there was nothing to find. The call finally came at 2:17 p.m. while Ellen was folding laundry in the Hendersons' guest bedroom. Ellen Rodriguez? Doctor. Reeves's voice was tight, strained. We need to meet. Not at the hospital, somewhere private. Ellen's hands started shaking so badly she dropped the towel she'd been folding. You found something. I found something that shouldn't exist. Something that was buried so deep I almost missed it entirely. A pause. There's a coffee shop on 6th Street. Moe's Coffee. Can you be there in an hour? I'll be there in 30 minutes. Ellen made an excuse to Mrs. Henderson about a family emergency, grabbed her purse and drove into downtown Austin with her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. Moe's Coffee was a small, independent place tucked between a vintage clothing store and a tattoo parlor, the kind of spot that served overpriced lattes to hipsters, and had mismatched furniture that was supposed to look artsy, but mostly just looked uncomfortable. Dr. Reeves was already there, hunched in a corner booth with a manila folder in front of her and a coffee she clearly hadn't touched. She looked like she'd aged 5 years since yesterday, her face drawn and pale. Ellen slid into the booth across from her, not bothering with pleasantries. What did you find? Dr. Reeves glanced around the coffee shop, making sure no one was close enough to overhear, then pushed the folder across the table. I shouldn't be showing you this. If anyone finds out, I could go to prison, but after what I discovered, I couldn't not tell you. Ellen's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of hospital records, birth certificates, admission forms. Her eyes scanned the pages, trying to make sense of medical terminology and official stamps. 7 years ago, Dr. Reeves said quietly, on the same night your son was taken, another woman gave birth at Austin Memorial, Victoria Miller. Ellen's head snapped up. Miller, as in Jonathan Miller's wife? Yes. Dr. Reeves's voice was barely above a whisper. She went into labor at 32 weeks, premature, high-risk pregnancy. I wasn't her primary doctor, but I was on call that night, and I remember because of all the security. Jonathan Miller had hired private guards to be stationed outside her room. He wanted absolute privacy. Ellen's mind was racing, connections forming like lightning strikes across a dark sky. What happened to her baby, doctor? Reeves's face crumpled. According to the official records, the baby was stillborn. A boy. There was a death certificate issued, a brief funeral notice in the paper. The Millers grieved privately, as wealthy people do, with their suffering hidden behind mansion walls and PR statements about family tragedy. But Ellen could hear it in the doctor's voice, the terrible but that was coming. But I pulled the original medical records from archives, the ones that should have been destroyed years ago according to protocol, but somehow weren't. And Ellen, the handwriting doesn't match. The signature on the death certificate is different from the signature on the birth certificate. The timestamps are wrong, and when I checked with the morgue, there's no record of any infant remains being processed that night. The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot, too small, the walls pressing in. What are you saying? I'm saying that baby didn't die. Dr. Reeves leaned forward, her eyes intense. Someone falsified those records. Someone declared that child dead when he wasn't. And then, 3 hours later, your son disappeared from the nursery. Ellen couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The implications were too enormous, too monstrous to comprehend. You're saying they switched the babies? Someone took my healthy son and gave him to the Millers in place of their... I don't know what happened. Dr. Reeves cut her off. I only know what the evidence suggests, and it suggests that something very wrong happened at Austin Memorial 7 years ago. Something that was covered up, something that involved people with enough money and power to make evidence disappear. Jonathan Miller. Ellen's voice was hollow. He knew. He had to have known. Or someone working for him knew. Ellen, people like the Millers don't do their own dirty work. They have lawyers, fixers, people who make problems disappear. If Victoria Miller's baby really was stillborn, if Jonathan was desperate enough to give his wife a living child to replace the one she'd lost, Dr. Reeves didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Ellen stared at the papers in front of her, at the evidence of a crime so calculated and cruel, it made her physically sick. Someone had stolen her baby. Not some random desperate woman, not a black market adoption ring, but a planned professional operation designed to give a millionaire what he wanted, a healthy son, no matter the cost. I need a DNA test. Ellen's voice came out stronger than she felt. I need to prove that Daniel Miller is my son. You'll never get it. Dr. Reeves shook her head. Jonathan Miller has the best lawyers money can buy. They'll fight you every step of the way. They'll drag you through court for years. They'll destroy your reputation, call you a gold digger, a liar, someone trying to take advantage of a vulnerable family. By the time you get within a mile of that DNA test, you'll be bankrupt and broken. I don't care. Ellen slammed her hand on the table hard enough that a couple at the next table looked over. She lowered her voice to a fierce whisper. That's my son, my baby. He was stolen from me. I don't care how much money Jonathan Miller has or how many lawyers he throws at me. I will not let this go. Dr. Reeves was quiet for a long moment, studying Ellen's face. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. This is a lawyer, Sarah Chen. She specializes in family law and wrongful adoption cases. She's taken on powerful people before and won. If anyone can help you, it's her. Tell her I sent you. Ellen took the card with trembling fingers. Why are you helping me? You could lose everything. Because 7 years ago I stood in that hospital and watched you fall apart when your baby was taken. I held your hand while you screamed. I saw your husband try to be strong for you while his own heart was breaking. And I knew something was wrong about that whole night. The timing, the convenience, the way security footage just happened to malfunction. Dr. Reeves's eyes were bright with tears. I've carried that guilt for 7 years. The guilt of not trusting my instincts, of not pushing harder for answers. Maybe I can't undo what happened, but I can help you fight for the truth now. Ellen stood up, the folder clutched to her chest. Thank you. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for caring enough to look. Ellen. Dr. Reeves caught her hand. Be careful. You're going up against someone with unlimited resources and no conscience. Jonathan Miller built his fortune on oil and ruthless business deals. He's not going to just hand over his son without a fight. And if he's willing to steal a baby, who knows what else he's willing to do? The warning hung in the air like smoke. Ellen nodded, squeezed Dr. Reeves's hand and walked out of the coffee shop into the bright Texas afternoon. She sat in her car for a long time, the folder on her lap, and tried to process everything. Her son was alive. Her baby boy, the one she'd mourned for 7 years, was living 20 minutes away in a mansion being raised by the man who'd stolen him. Ellen pulled out her phone and dialed the number on Sarah Chen's business card. The receptionist answered on the second ring, professional and efficient. I need to speak with Sarah Chen, Ellen said, her voice steady despite the chaos inside her. Tell her it's about a stolen child. Tell her it's about Jonathan Miller. And tell her I'm not backing down. Sarah Chen's office was nothing like Ellen expected. She'd imagined something sterile and corporate, all glass and steel and expensive art that meant nothing. Instead, she found herself in a converted Victorian house in the Clarksville neighborhood, with hardwood floors that creaked and walls painted in warm earth tones. The waiting room had comfortable chairs that looked lived in rather than decorative, and children's toys scattered in one corner. A wooden train set, picture books, stuffed animals that had clearly been hugged by small hands seeking comfort. Ellen sat in one of those chairs, her knee bouncing with nervous energy, the manila folder clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She'd been waiting 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. Every time she heard footsteps in the hallway, her heart jumped into her throat. Finally, a door opened and a woman emerged. Sarah Chen was in her late 30s, petite and sharp-eyed, with glossy black hair cut in a severe bob that somehow made her look more formidable rather than less. She wore a crisp white blouse and tailored black pants, and moved with the kind of confidence that came from winning battles against people who thought money made them invincible. Mrs. Rodriguez? Her voice was surprisingly gentle. Please come in. Ellen followed her into an office that was organized chaos, files stacked on every surface, a whiteboard covered in timelines and case notes, framed photos of children who looked like they'd been reunited with their families. Sarah gestured to a chair across from her desk and sat down, folding her hands in front of her. Dr. Reeves called me, Sarah said without preamble. Told me your story. Told me about the hospital records. And I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Rodriguez, Ellen. This is going to be the fight of your life. I know. Ellen's voice didn't waver. I don't care. Jonathan Miller is worth an estimated $400 million. He has a legal team that could fill this entire house. He has connections to judges, politicians, police chiefs. When I go after him, and I will go after him if you want me to, he's going to come at us with everything he has. He'll try to destroy your credibility. He'll dig into every mistake you've ever made, every late bill payment, every moment of your life that can be twisted into evidence that you're an unfit mother. He already thinks I'm an unfit mother, Ellen said bitterly. He thinks I'm an opportunist trying to scam him. Might as well give him a real reason to be afraid of me. Sarah's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but held approval. Before we move forward, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Is there any possibility, any at all, that you're wrong? That Daniel Miller is not your son? Because if we pursue this and we're wrong, you'll be destroyed. Financially, emotionally, legally, there will be no coming back from it. Ellen opened the folder. pulled out a photograph she'd printed that morning from Emily's phone. It was from the Miller Mansion's Instagram account. Jonathan Miller apparently had some social media manager who posted carefully curated glimpses of their life. This photo showed Daniel at his 6th birthday party, his face covered in chocolate cake, his smile wide and genuine. His left wrist was visible, reaching for another slice of cake. The crescent moon birthmark was clearly visible. Ellen set the photo on Sarah's desk, then pulled out another document, Benjamin's hospital records from 7 years ago. The ones she'd kept in a box under her bed, unable to look at them, but unable to throw them away. The page that detailed his identifying marks, including a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left wrist. "That's my son," Ellen said, her voice breaking. "I held him for 4 hours. I memorized every inch of him. I kissed that birthmark and told him it was the moon watching over him. I know my own child." Sarah studied both images for a long moment, then looked up at Ellen with eyes that had seen too many broken families and too much injustice. "Okay, I believe you. Now we need proof that will stand up in court. We need a DNA test." "How?" "Jonathan Miller will never agree to." "We don't need his agreement. We need a court order." Sarah pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "I'll file for emergency DNA testing based on suspected child abduction and identity fraud. We'll present the hospital records, the discrepancies in Victoria Miller's birth records, the timeline of your son's disappearance. It won't be easy. Miller's lawyers will fight us every step. But if we can get it in front of the right judge, someone who cares more about justice than politics, we have a shot." "How long will that take?" "Weeks, maybe months. The legal system moves slowly, especially when you're fighting someone with resources to delay and obstruct." Sarah set down her pen and looked at Ellen directly. "I need to be clear about costs. I don't work for free, but I do work on contingency for cases like this. If we win, if we prove Daniel is your son, there will be damages, compensation for wrongful adoption, for the years stolen from you, for emotional distress. My fee comes out of that. But if we lose, you owe me nothing except the filing fees and court costs. A few $1,000s at most." "I don't have a few $1,000s, Ellen admitted, shame burning in her cheeks. "I have about $800 in savings. That's it. Then we'll work it out. Payment plans. Whatever it takes." Sarah leaned forward. "Ellen, I didn't become a family lawyer to get rich. I did it because I grew up in foster care, bounced between homes, never knowing who I really was or where I came from. When I was 16, I found out I'd been stolen from my birth mother by a woman who couldn't have children of her own. By the time the truth came out, my real mother had died of cancer, never knowing what happened to me. So when Dr. Reeves called me about your case, about a mother who's still alive and still fighting," her voice caught. "I'm not letting Jonathan Miller win. Not this time." Ellen felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't bother wiping them away. "What do I do now?" "You go home, you take care of your daughter. You keep working, keep living your life as normally as possible. And you let me handle the legal warfare." Sarah stood up, came around the desk, and put a hand on Ellen's shoulder. "This is going to get ugly. Miller is going to make public statements calling you a liar. The media is going to tear you apart. People are going to say terrible things about you on social media. Your life is going to become a nightmare for a while. Are you ready for that?" Ellen thought about Daniel's face when she'd saved him, the way he'd clung to her like she was the only safe thing in a terrifying world. She thought about Benjamin, her baby boy, stolen from her arms while she slept. She thought about 7 years of grief and guilt and wondering if she could have done something different, something more, something better. "I'm ready," she said. "I've been ready for 7 years." The news broke 3 days later. Ellen was at work, cleaning the bathroom at the Morrison house when her phone started blowing up with notifications. Text messages from numbers she didn't recognize, friend requests on Facebook from reporters, Emily calling, her voice panicked. "Mom, turn on the news, you're on the news." Ellen's hands shook as she pulled up the local news website on her phone. The headline hit her like a fist. Local woman claims millionaire's son was stolen from her 7 years ago. The article was brutal. It quoted sources close to the Miller family, calling Ellen's claims baseless and opportunistic. It mentioned her financial struggles, her job as a cleaning lady, the fact that she'd worked in the Miller home. It made her sound like a con artist, a desperate woman trying to extort money from a grieving widower. But buried in the article, in the last paragraph, was the one thing that mattered. A court hearing has been scheduled for next week to determine whether DNA testing will be ordered. Ellen sat on the bathroom floor, her phone clutched in her hand, and felt the weight of what she'd started. There was no going back now. The whole world was watching, and soon, very soon, the truth would come out. Whatever that truth turned out to be. The courtroom was smaller than Ellen had imagined, less dramatic than the ones on television with their soaring ceilings and mahogany everything. This was Travis County Family Court, room 304, with fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill and industrial carpet that had seen better decades. But what it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in tension so thick Ellen could barely breathe through it. She sat at the plaintiff's table with Sarah Chen, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Across the aisle, Jonathan Miller sat flanked by 3 lawyers in suits that probably cost more than Ellen's car. He hadn't looked at her once since entering the courtroom, his jaw set in a hard line, his eyes fixed straight ahead like she didn't exist. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Hartwell, with steel gray hair and the kind of face that had heard every lie and sob story the family court system had to offer. She studied the case files in front of her with the intensity of someone who understood that her decision would shatter at least one life today, possibly more. "This is a preliminary hearing," Judge Hartwell said, her voice carrying authority that silenced the whispers in the gallery. "We're here to determine whether there is sufficient cause to order DNA testing of the minor child, Daniel Miller. Ms. Chen, you may present your argument." Sarah stood, and Ellen watched her transform into something formidable. "Your Honor, we have evidence suggesting that Daniel Miller, age 6, is in fact Benjamin Rodriguez, who was abducted from Austin Memorial Hospital on March 15th, 7 years ago. We have hospital records showing irregularities in the death certificate of Victoria Miller's biological child, who was allegedly stillborn on the same night. We have testimony from medical staff suggesting a cover-up. And we have physical evidence, a distinctive birthmark that matches the stolen child's medical records. We're asking for a simple DNA test. If we're wrong, we'll drop the case immediately. But if we're right, a child has been living with the wrong family for his entire life, and a mother has been robbed of 7 years with her son." One of Jonathan's lawyers stood up, a man with perfectly styled silver hair and a smile like a shark. "Your Honor, this is a transparent attempt at extortion. Mrs. Rodriguez worked in my client's home. She had access to family photos, personal information, everything she needed to construct this elaborate fiction. She's a woman with significant financial difficulties who saw an opportunity to exploit a wealthy family during their darkest time. My client's wife died in a tragic accident. His son nearly died at the hands of a deranged nanny. And now he's being accused of child theft based on nothing but speculation and a common birthmark that millions of people have. A crescent moon on the left wrist is hardly common." Sarah shot back. "And Mrs. Rodriguez didn't come forward looking for money. She came forward looking for truth after saving that child's life and hearing disturbing statements from the perpetrator about his identity." Judge Hartwell held up a hand. "What statements?" Sarah consulted her notes. Catherine Walsh, the nanny currently in custody for attempted murder, told Mrs. Rodriguez, and I quote, "He's not Jonathan Miller's son, and ask about the baby that disappeared 7 years ago." These statements were witnessed by multiple people, including police officers on the scene. "Catherine Walsh is mentally unstable," the shark lawyer countered. "She's facing serious criminal charges. Her statements have no credibility." "Which is exactly why we need DNA evidence," Sarah pressed, "to either corroborate or disprove her claims. What's the harm in a simple cheek swab? Unless Mr. Miller has something to hide." Jonathan stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I have nothing to hide. That's my son." I've raised him since birth, loved him, cared for him. Mr. Miller, sit down, Judge Hartwell commanded. I understand emotions are high, but outbursts will not be tolerated in my courtroom. Jonathan sat, but Ellen could see his hands clenched into fists on the table, his face flushed with rage or fear or both. Your Honor, Sarah continued, there's one more thing. We've subpoenaed Catherine Walsh for testimony. She's indicated a willingness to speak about what she knows regarding Daniel Miller's origins. With your permission, we'd like to call her now. The courtroom erupted. Jonathan's lawyers were on their feet, objecting loudly. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Judge Hartwell banged her gavel 3 times. Order! Ms. Chen, this is highly irregular. Ms. Walsh is facing criminal charges. She's been granted immunity from additional prosecution in exchange for her testimony about the events surrounding Daniel Miller's adoption, Sarah said smoothly. The DA's office has signed off on it. She's waiting outside right now. Ellen's heart hammered against her ribs. Catherine Walsh, the woman who'd tried to kill Daniel. The woman who'd planted the seed of doubt that had led to this moment. What could she possibly say that would help? Judge Hartwell looked displeased but nodded. Bring her in, but Ms. Chen, this better be worth everyone's time. The bailiff opened the door, and Catherine Walsh entered in an orange prison jumpsuit, her hands cuffed in front of her. She looked different from that terrible day. Thinner, paler, her hair limp and unwashed. But her eyes were clear, sharp, and when they landed on Ellen, something like regret flickered across her face. She was sworn in, sat in the witness box, and Sarah approached her carefully, like someone approaching a live grenade. Ms. Walsh, you attempted to harm Daniel Miller. Can you tell the court why? Catherine's voice was quiet but steady. Because I couldn't stand watching the lie continue. Because every time I looked at that boy, I saw the truth that everyone wanted buried. What truth? That he wasn't Jonathan Miller's son, that he'd been stolen from his real mother and given to people who had no right to him. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. I worked for the Millers for 3 months. I loved that boy, but I also knew where he came from. And it ate at me, every single day. The courtroom was dead silent. Ellen could hear her own heartbeat, could feel every eye in the room on Catherine. How did you know this? Sarah asked. Catherine took a shaky breath. Because I was there, 7 years ago. I was the woman who posed as a social worker at Austin Memorial Hospital. I was the one who falsified Victoria Miller's death certificate. I was the one who took Benjamin Rodriguez from the nursery and delivered him to the Millers. The courtroom exploded. Jonathan was shouting. His lawyers were objecting. The gallery erupted in shocked exclamations. Judge Hartwell banged her gavel so hard Ellen thought it might break. Order! I will clear this courtroom if necessary. Slowly, the chaos subsided into tense electric silence. Ellen felt like she couldn't breathe, couldn't process what she just heard. This woman who'd tried to kill Daniel, had been the one who stole him in the first place. Ms. Walsh, Judge Hartwell said, her voice cold as ice. Are you confessing to kidnapping? I'm confessing to my part in it, yes. Catherine's tears were flowing freely now. But I didn't act alone. I was hired. Paid very well. Given explicit instructions on how to avoid cameras, which credentials to fake, exactly when to take the baby. It was planned down to the minute. Hired by whom? Sarah's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Catherine looked directly at Jonathan Miller. I was hired by Richard Morrison, Jonathan Miller's personal attorney and fixer, the man who makes problems disappear for wealthy clients. He approached me 2 weeks before Victoria Miller went into labor. Said there might be complications, said they needed a backup plan in case the baby didn't survive, said there was a substantial payment waiting if I could provide a healthy male infant of the right age and appearance. That's a lie! Jonathan was on his feet again, his face purple with rage. Richard would never, this is insane. But Ellen saw it, saw the moment of hesitation before his denial, saw the fear in his eyes, saw the truth written all over his face. You knew, Ellen heard herself say, her voice cutting through the chaos. Everyone turned to look at her. You knew where he came from. You knew he was stolen. You knew he was mine. Jonathan's mouth opened, closed. His lawyers were pulling at his arms, telling him to sit down, to shut up, but he couldn't seem to stop staring at Ellen. I didn't know, he finally said, but his voice was hollow. Not at first. Victoria's baby died during delivery. She was devastated, suicidal. Richard said he could fix it, said he knew someone who could help. I thought he meant a private adoption. I thought it was legal. I never asked questions because I didn't want to know the answers. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Judge Hartwell's face had gone pale. Your Honor, Sarah said quietly, we request an immediate DNA test and temporary custody pending results. Judge Hartwell nodded slowly, looking like she'd aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. Granted. DNA testing will be expedited. Results within 48 hours. Mr. Miller, you are ordered to bring Daniel Miller to the county medical examiner's office tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for sample collection. If you fail to comply, I will hold you in contempt and issue a warrant for the child's immediate removal from your home. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down with the weight of destiny. 48 hours felt like 48 lifetimes. Ellen existed in a state of suspended animation, unable to eat, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but wait for the phone call that would either resurrect her dead son or confirm that she'd destroyed an innocent family based on desperate hope and circumstantial evidence. Emily stayed home from school, refusing to leave her mother's side. They sat together on the worn couch in their small living room, the television playing news coverage they weren't really watching. The story had exploded nationally. Millionaire accused of raising stolen child was trending on every social media platform. The internet had divided into camps. Those who believed Ellen was a grieving mother fighting for justice, and those who thought she was a con artist trying to steal a rich man's son. Ellen didn't care what the internet thought. She only cared about one thing. The call came at 3:47 p.m. on the second day. Sarah Chen's name lit up Ellen's phone screen, and for a moment Ellen couldn't make her hand move to answer it. Emily grabbed the phone and pressed accept, then held it to her mother's ear. Ellen. Sarah's voice was thick with emotion. It's a match. Daniel Miller is Benjamin Rodriguez. He's your son. The world tilted sideways. Ellen heard a sound like a wounded animal and realized it was coming from her own throat. Emily was crying, her arms wrapped around Ellen, both of them shaking with sobs that came from 7 years of grief finally finding release. The results are irrefutable, Sarah continued, her own voice breaking. 99.9% probability of biological relation. I'm sending the official documents to your email right now. Ellen, you were right. You were right all along. Ellen couldn't speak, couldn't form words past the tsunami of emotions crashing through her. Relief, vindication, joy. And underneath it all, a rage so profound it threatened to consume her. Rage at the people who'd stolen her baby. Rage at the years she'd lost. Rage at a system that had failed her so completely. What happens now? Emily asked, her voice small, still clinging to her mother. Now we fight for custody, Sarah said. Jonathan Miller's legal team is already filing appeals, trying to argue that Daniel has bonded with him, that removing him from the only home he's known would be traumatic. They're going to use every trick in the book to delay, to complicate, to make this as difficult as possible. I don't care. Ellen found her voice finally, and it came out steel hard, unbreakable. That's my son. Mine. And I'm bringing him home. The custody hearing was scheduled for the following week, but Sarah had filed for emergency visitation rights, arguing that Ellen had been denied access to her child for 7 years and deserved immediate contact. Judge Hartwell, perhaps swayed by the DNA evidence or perhaps just exhausted by the whole sordid mess, granted supervised visitation at a neutral location, a family services office downtown. Ellen dressed carefully that morning, her hands shaking as she buttoned her best blouse. Emily helped her with her hair, pulling it back in a neat bun, and held her mother's hands when the trembling got too bad. He might not remember you, Emily said gently. He was just a baby. He thinks Jonathan is his dad. I know. Ellen squeezed her daughter's hands. I know it's going to be confusing for him. Scary even. But he deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know who his real family is. The Family Services building was a converted office complex that tried too hard to look cheerful with its bright yellow walls and inspirational posters about family unity. Ellen sat in the visitation room, a space with child-sized furniture, toys scattered in corners, and a two-way mirror where supervisors could observe, and tried to control her breathing. The door opened. A social worker entered first, a kind-faced woman named Patricia who specialized in reunification cases. And behind her, holding her hand with visible reluctance, was Daniel. Ellen's heart stopped. Started. Stopped again. He was so much bigger than the infant she'd held 7 years ago. Taller. His baby fat had melted into the lean angles of childhood. His blonde hair was longer now, falling into those blue eyes that she'd dreamed about for 7 years. He wore jeans and a t-shirt with a dinosaur on it, and he looked terrified, confused, like he'd been dropped into some alternate reality where nothing made sense. Daniel, Patricia said gently, kneeling beside him. This is Ellen Rodriguez. She's someone very special who wants to meet you. Daniel's eyes found Ellen's and something flickered across his face. Recognition? Impossible. He'd been 3 days old when she lost him. But he remembered her from the mansion, from the day she'd saved him. His grip on Patricia's hand loosened slightly. Hi, Daniel. Ellen's voice came out choked with tears she was trying desperately to hold back. She wanted to run to him, to grab him, to hold him, and never let go. But she forced herself to stay seated, to let him come to her at his own pace. Do you remember me? Daniel nodded slowly. You saved me. From Catherine. I did. Ellen smiled through her tears. You were very brave that day. Are you really my mom? The question was so small, so lost, it broke Ellen's heart into 1,000 pieces. Mr. Miller said it's not true. He said there was a mistake, but the lawyers said... His voice cracked. I don't understand. Ellen looked at Patricia, who nodded permission. Ellen slid off her chair and knelt on the floor, making herself smaller, less threatening. Can I tell you a story? Daniel hesitated, then nodded again. 7 years ago, I had a baby boy. I named him Benjamin, after his grandfather. He had blonde hair just like yours and blue eyes just like yours and a little birthmark on his wrist shaped like a moon. Ellen held up her hand, showing her own wrist. I only got to hold him for a little while before someone took him away from me. I looked for him for so long. I never stopped looking, and then one day I found him again. I found you. But I'm Daniel, he said, confusion and fear warring in his voice. I live with my dad. I go to Westlake Prep. I have a room with all my toys and my books, and his eyes filled with tears. I want to go home. The words were a knife to Ellen's chest. She understood in that moment the full cruelty of what had been done. Not just to her, but to Daniel. He'd been stolen twice, once as an infant, and now in a way the truth was stealing him from the only life he'd known. I know this is scary, Ellen said softly. I know you're confused, but I want you to know something. No matter what happens, no matter where you end up living or what name you use, I love you. I've loved you since the moment you were born. I loved you every single day you were gone, and I'm going to love you for the rest of my life. Daniel stared at her, tears streaming down his face. Then slowly, tentatively, he lifted his left wrist and looked at the crescent moon birthmark there. It's a moon? It's a moon watching over you, Ellen whispered, the same words she'd said 7 years ago. To keep you safe, to help you find your way home. Something shifted in Daniel's expression. He took a step toward Ellen, then another. And then he was in her arms, sobbing against her shoulder the way he had that day at the mansion, and Ellen was holding her son, her baby, her Benjamin, her Daniel, for the first time in 7 years. Patricia was crying silently in the corner. Through the two-way mirror, Ellen knew Sarah was watching, knew Emily was watching, knew the whole world seemed to be watching this moment. Ellen held Daniel tight, one hand cradling his head, and let herself cry. For the years lost. For the innocence stolen. For the confusion and pain this boy would have to work through. But also for this. For having him back, for holding him, for the impossible miracle of finding what she thought was lost forever. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered against her neck. "I'm sorry you were sad." "Oh, sweetheart." Ellen pulled back enough to look at his face, to wipe his tears with her thumbs. "You have nothing to be sorry for. None of this is your fault. None of it." "Will I still see my dad?" The question was tentative, scared. "Mr. Miller, he's not. He said he didn't know. He said he thought I was adopted regular. He's been crying a lot." Ellen felt the anger surge again. Jonathan Miller didn't deserve this boy's concern, didn't deserve his love, but she forced it down because Daniel loved him. Whether she liked it or not, Jonathan had raised him, had been the only father he'd known, and tearing that away completely would only hurt Daniel more. "I don't know yet," Ellen said honestly. "The grown-ups have to figure some things out, but whatever happens, I promise you this. I'm going to do what's best for you. Not what's easiest for me. What's best for you. Okay?" Daniel nodded, then looked at her with those heartbreaking blue eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything." "If I'm really Benjamin, do I have any brothers or sisters?" Ellen's heart swelled. "You have a sister. Her name is Emily. She's 16 and she's been waiting 7 years to meet you. She's right outside. Would you like to meet her?" For the first time since entering the room, Daniel smiled. Small and uncertain, but real. "Okay." Patricia opened the door, and Emily entered, her face streaked with tears, her hands twisting nervously. She looked at Daniel with an expression of such love and wonder it made Ellen want to cry all over again. "Hi," Emily said softly. "I'm your big sister." Daniel studied her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. "I've always wanted a sister. Sometimes the truth doesn't set us free. Sometimes it shatters us into pieces we have to painstakingly put back together." Ellen Rodriguez fought against impossible odds, against unlimited wealth, against a world that told her to give up and move on. But she didn't. Because a mother's love doesn't bow to money or power or convenience. It doesn't calculate odds or measure costs. It simply refuses to stop fighting. And in that refusal, in that relentless pursuit of truth despite the pain it would cause everyone involved, she proved that some bonds cannot be broken by time or distance, or even theft. But here's what will haunt you long after this story ends. What would you have done in Jonathan Miller's place faced with a dying wife and a stillborn child? Would you have had the strength to let your wife grieve? Or would you have made the same desperate choice? And what about Daniel, a boy caught between two truths, two families, two versions of who he's supposed to be? The real tragedy isn't just what was stolen, it's what can never be fully restored. Because even when justice wins, even when the truth comes to light, there are wounds that time alone cannot heal. There are only scars we learn to carry with grace. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the price of truth and the weight of love, then subscribe to this channel for more stories that will challenge you, break you, and remind you what it means to be human. Leave a like if you believe justice matters more than comfort. And share this story with someone who needs to remember that no matter how dark the night, no matter how impossible the odds, some fights are worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt. Because in the end, truth is the only foundation strong enough to build a life on.